Well, it's a joy to be with you, and I hope and pray that some of the things I share that I've learned across a journey of faith that may be helpful to you. And particularly, I just say a few personal things. I grew up in a military family, an Air Force family, and learned a lot about geography early on, and particularly from February of 1961 to March of 1967. I went to 2 elementary schools, 3 junior highs, and 4 high schools, from Florida to Illinois to Alabama to Spain to Maine and Nebraska, and then back to Florida and graduated high school 3 months later. So I just learned a lot about geography and places. And the point of that I'm trying to say is I learned as a gift, as I look back on it, is to learn about life wasn't about to acquire things, because we were moving. I'm the oldest of 5 children and of a career sergeant in the Air Force. And so the whole point of the quest of life was trying to find the meaning of life, and it wasn't about consumption. So years later, I'm 2 months out of the Army, and I had spent 3 years in Germany and as a rifle platoon leader, lieutenant, had 36 men in my platoon. And I was all into maps and compasses, because in the infantry, if you don't know where you are dead. And so that was a necessity. And so I've learned in life, if you don't know where you are, you may not be physically dead, but you may be spiritually dead, or you are wandering in the wilderness. And so I was stationed in Mainz, Germany, and that particularly is the place where there is the Gutenberg Museum. The first Bible was published in Mainz back in the 1400s, I believe. But I never made it to the Gutenberg Museum, because I made every wine fest and every beer fest. That was BC, chronologically speaking, before Christ. And so if I went back now in AD time, I would go there and go a lot of other places that I used to not go. And so, but I'd like to share a passage, I think, that helps me understand what this is about. Jesus is speaking in John chapter 17, verses 14 to 19. He says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world. Jesus is praying to his Father, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. And for their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also may be sanctified by the truth. Well, 2 months out of the Army, I'm hitchhiking through Europe. I've got a rucksack on, grew a beard, and now I'm down in Spain. I'd gone to high school in Spain for a while, spoke enough Spanish, so I'm in Barcelona, Spain. I meet 2 Australian guys doing the same thing, Mick and Rick. So we throw in together and go all over Spain, and then we go over to Morocco and Algeria. And so now we're in Algeria. We're seeing the sights, and I need a map. We're fresh out of maps, and I need a map. So we go to Algiers, in downtown Algiers, the state map-making department. And I go up and knock on the door where they're actually making the maps. I didn't know French, I didn't know Arabic, but international arm and hand signals indicating to the guy I needed a map. I had some dirhams, I was ready to pay for it, and they kept shooing me away. And finally, I was just persistent enough, they got tired of me and they threw a map at me. So I took it, and naturally, from my background, I checked the map out, and the thing that struck me was that the maps of Morocco and Algeria, and maybe some of the other countries I recall, the lines from left and right, the borders were shown, but there was no connecting at the bottom. And I thought, every map I've ever seen in the West always shows the line at the bottom where they actually connect and where the actual border is. And so the next day we were around the University of Algiers, and there were some Algerian students there wanting to practice their English, speaking with Mick, Rick, and I. And so we're talking, and I asked this question of one of the young fellas, which is about my age at the time. I was 24, and ask him about why there's no boundary. They run out of ink. What's the deal? And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders like, what's the problem? So as I thought about that for some time, I'm thinking, wait a minute. And all my moving around, I always like to be able to put one foot in one state, one in the other, so to speak, so you knew where you were. But in this case, there's no boundary, and yet there is the Sahara Desert that is there. And apparently, what I heard from the young guys, who cares? This is Sahara Desert is boundary enough. We don't need to draw a line, a man-made line. And so that got me to thinking over the years, rethinking geography from a spiritual perspective. One thing I've learned is it holds that if you don't know where you are maybe not only not living, but just only not dying. A death that has eternal consequences, and that has all to do with the meaning of life. So in Genesis chapter 2, verse 16 and 17, talk about the first boundary. God says to Adam and Eve, you're welcome to have the fruit in the Garden of Eden, of all the fruit, except this one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A boundary was established by God. And of course, Adam and Eve being who they are, and I wish I didn't know them as well as I do, where did we go first? We went to the one tree that you're not supposed to go to. I've seen that in my grandchildren. 2-year-old, tell them not to do something, guess where they're going first? And so that's just a fact of fallen nature, human life. And so the boundary was there, and yet Satan was there. The serpent was saying, you won't die. You can eat that piece of fruit there in Genesis chapter 3, particularly verse 5. He says, you can be like God. You can decide what's good and evil. And so Eve partook and gave some to her husband Adam. And so that's when the fall began. God gets blamed for all the trouble in the world, and Satan gets blamed as Satan or blamed God. No, it was us. And so we made the choice and decided what was good and evil, and we continue to do so. And so I found that was a God-given boundary. Don't eat this piece of fruit. Well, what was the fruit? A lot of people say it's an apple. No, it's not an apple. The forbidden fruit is the choice of self over God and others. That's the forbidden fruit. And so that's where the problem continues. And so what I'm going to offer up now is a spiritual geography, a map I've been working on for a lot of years, trying to decide where I am, where we are, and where I need to be. And so it's a spiritual map sheet of which I pray will prove to be a map reconnaissance that will help you find exactly where you are. And in fact, in reference to the only reference point that matters, namely Jesus Christ, who gives all life its meaning. And so from our fallen nature, history proves, and if you study world history as well as church history proves that we have a desire for control. And we tend to, across history and presently, polarize on the left and on the right, and all the tensions and all the wars from those sides. And so we'll look further at